The forest trembled under footsteps older than time itself. Shadows moved across the ancient ferns as a giant emerged from the mist. He was the last of his kind, a silent guardian in a world changing too fast. Storms no longer came from the sky, they rose from the earth itself. As the wind whispered warnings and rivers ran dry, one name echoed through the valley: Dinosaurs. Alone but not forgotten, he would soon face a force that even giants could not escape. His world was crumbling, but his story had only just begun. Introduction / setting the scene. 160 million years ago, Earth was not the world known today. There were no cities, no oceans filled with ships, no humans to mark their time. Instead, vast continents stretched under fiery skies broken by thunder and ash. The air was thick with moisture, and heat rose from the ground like breath from a hidden beast. Forests of towering ferns and strange conifers covered the land, and rivers flowed in winding paths carved by time alone. In the heart of what would one day be called Europe, a land of silence, and giants lay undisturbed. Here trees reached higher than houses, and every leaf shimmered in the golden light of an unfamiliar sun. Volcanic mountains loomed in the distance, constantly smoking, watching all that moved below. This was the Middle Jurassic period, when dinosaurs were not rulers, but survivors, each day shaped by instinct, strength, and hunger. Among these giants walked Dinosaurs, a creature older than war, larger than memory. He did not seek conflict or conquest. His path was slow as life, measured by the rhythm of the earth. At over 50 feet long and weighing more than 20 tons, he moved through the forest like a drifting island, his body silent but unstoppable. His thick legs left impressions that filled with rain and stayed for weeks. His long neck reached high into the treetops, feeding on leaves untouched by smaller creatures. Dinosaurus was not a hunter, nor was he prey. He lived in harmony with the land, respecting its dangers while trusting its patterns. For many cycles of the moon, his days were unchanged, a life of wandering, feeding, drinking, and resting beneath ancient trees. He was not alone, but he was often apart from others, his kind scattered across the land, connected only by distant calls and shared memory. But the world was never still. Beneath the soil, forces stirred, and deep in the clouds, change was beginning to form. Far away predators grew more cunning, and the land itself began to shift. The safety Dinosaurus had known for so long would not last. His story was about to take a turn that even time could not forget. Introduction of Dinosaurus. Dinosaurus was a creature shaped by the patience of the earth. His body was vast and solid, built not for speed but for endurance. His skin was thick like bark and colored in shades of gray and moss green, helping him blend into the forest shadows. Along his neck ran a faint line of darker scales, while his tail stretched behind him like a living bridge between past and present. Each movement was calm and deliberate, as though he understood that time was not a thing to be chased. His eyes were small but not dull. In them rested a quiet wisdom born from years of solitude and survival. He saw the world not in sharp detail, but in the patterns of wind, scent, and sound. He knew where the rivers curved and where the ground dipped low after storms. He recognized the distant rumble of a volcano long before it could be seen. He sensed the footsteps of others and remembered paths walked long ago. Dinosaurus lived without fear, yet not without caution. Though he had little to fear from predators, his size did not make him invincible. Packs of hungry carnivores still hunted smaller dinosaurs, and if they were desperate enough, even giants could become targets. But Dinosaurus knew the strength of stillness. He did not panic. When danger came, he moved to higher ground or deeper forest. He trusted his instincts, and they had never failed him. Each morning he rose with the mist, his great body warming in the sunlight that broke through the leaves. He drank from cool streams, letting the water wash over his tongue and down his throat like melted stone. He fed on high branches, pulling entire boughs into his mouth and grinding them slowly. He moved in wide loops across the forest, never staying too long in one place, yet always returning to the same clearings and watering holes. Other creatures came and went. Small flying reptiles circled above his head, sometimes landing on his back to feed on insects that clung to his skin. Tiny scavengers followed in his path, picking through broken branches and disturbed soil. Occasionally he crossed paths with another of his kind, and for a moment they would pause side by side, not speaking, not fighting, simply existing together in quiet understanding. He did not dream. His sleep was deep, and still broken only by the cries of the night. But if he could have dreamed, it would have been of tall trees, slow rivers, and the comfort of silence. He asked nothing of the world and gave nothing but his presence. Yet in the heart of his steady world, change was coming. The rivers would not always flow. The trees would not always stand. And even a creature as ancient and calm as Cetiosaurus would soon be forced to choose between the old paths and the unknown. Inciting incident. The day began like any other. Mist clung to the undergrowth, and the sky above held the soft orange of morning light. Cetiosaurus moved slowly along the river's edge, his neck stretching toward the canopy, his heavy feet sinking gently into the wet soil. Birds scattered as he passed, their calls short and high-pitched. All was as it should be, but then came the sound. Not wind, not water, not any creature he knew. It was deep, distant, like thunder trapped underground. The earth gave a soft tremble, one that rippled to his feet and up his spine. He paused, head lifting, body still as stone. The forest around him quieted. No birds, no insects, no rustling in the leaves. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. A second tremble followed, stronger, now more certain. Trees swayed though the wind had not moved. A sharp scent filled the air, sulfur and ash dry and biting. Cetiosaurus turned slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon. Beyond the hills a shadow formed above the trees. Not a cloud, but something darker, wider, rising straight into the sky. The volcano had awakened. It had not erupted in his lifetime. Its peak had always been shrouded in mist, harmless and distant. But now smoke poured from its crown, and the mountain rumbled like a beast rising from sleep. The sky began to darken as fine ash floated on the wind, turning daylight to dusk. The forest floor shook again, and again the tremors growing stronger as deep cracks split the ground near the river. The stream he had followed for years began to recede, pull back, as if the earth itself was drinking it dry. Trees groaned, roots tearing loose from the soil. Birds flew in panic flocks, and smaller dinosaurs ran in groups blind with fear. The balance was breaking. Cetiosaurus did not run. He could not. But he began to move faster than before, his long legs lifting in steady strides, his tail swinging wide for balance. He did not understand the science of the mountain or the danger of molten rock, but he knew change when he felt it. The land that had always held him was now pushing him away. He turned from the river path and began to climb the eastern ridge, the ground rising beneath him into forested hills untouched by tremors. Behind him ash thickened in the air, turning leaves gray and coating his back in a cold, dry layer. The world he had trusted was no longer silent, and in that moment the great Cetiosaurus knew that his life would never again be the same. Rising action. The forest had changed. Where once light filtered through green leaves, now darkness hovered. Ash drifted between the trees, settling like snow over every branch and stone. The air tasted of metal and fire, and the wind carried distant sounds. Not just the deep roar of the volcano, but sharp cries that did not belong to the forest. The animals had scattered, and the balance of nature had shattered. Cetiosaurus moved onward step by heavy step. His path had grown unfamiliar, even though his feet had walked this forest for years. The ground cracked in strange patterns, the once firm soil brittle and warm. Trees had fallen across his usual trails, forcing him to find new routes over ridges and through tangled brush. His body ached from the constant climb, and his mouth was dry from the thick air. Then he heard it, the roar. It was unlike any other sound in his world. Not the call of a predator, not the shriek of panic, but long, deep challenge. It came from the base of the hill, just below the narrow pass he had begun to cross. He paused, listening. The air went still again, and then the cry came once more, this time closer, sharper, filled with hunger. From the ash a shadow emerged. A pair of eyes flashed in the haze, followed by a long, low body and claws that dragged through the dust. The creature stood no higher than Cetiosaurus's leg, but its presence was sharp, dangerous. This was a megalosaurus, a hunter, not alone. Behind it came another, and another, three in total, each with lean muscles, long jaws, and a pack instinct that made them more than just predators. They were coordinated threats. Cetiosaurus turned slowly, his tail swinging wide to protect his flank. He did not panic, but he felt the tension in his chest. These were not foolish scavengers. These were desperate creatures driven by hunger, by chaos, by the shift in the land. They circled him, watching, waiting, each step testing his reach. They knew he was too big to take down easily, but they also knew he was alone, and the forest no longer offered hiding places. As they moved in closer, a new sound broke through the trees, a crashing of underbrush and a heavy grunt. From the shadows, a second giant appeared. Not as tall as Cedosaurus, but broad and horned with thick plates across its back. A Stegosaurus. Its tail swung like a club, and its steps were filled with purpose. It moved between Cedosaurus and the circling predators, its back arched its mouth, pulling into a silent warning. The Megalosaurus pack hesitated. One lunged forward, testing the newcomer, but the Stegosaurus was ready. Its spiked tail whipped through the air and caught the predator across the ribs, sending it tumbling into the dust. The others backed away, uncertain now. The moment broke, and with it the threat passed. The predators disappeared into the smoke, their hunger unsatisfied. Cedosaurus looked at the Stegosaurus, unsure of what to expect. The smaller giant stood still, its sides heaving. No sound passed between them, but they understood one another. In this new world, survival was no longer a solo path. They moved together now. As days passed, more signs of destruction appeared. Lakes had dried into cracked plains where bones lay exposed. Flocks of smaller dinosaurs crossed their path in terrified clusters. The sky remained dark for days at a time, and sometimes the rain fell thick and black. Cedosaurus and his new companion traveled east, hoping to find land untouched by fire or flood. Along the way they found others. A young Dryosaurus, barely half-grown, limping behind a fallen log. They paused and waited, letting it catch up. A flock of Rhamphorhynchus circled above, sometimes vanishing into clouds, then returning with wild cries, as if mapping the sky ahead. And from the cliffs a mighty sound rolled down, the low, deep call of another long-necked creature echoing across the canyon. Somewhere out there others of Cedosaurus's kind still walked, but time was running short. The deeper they moved into the wild, the more unstable the ground became. Fires sparked even in wet soil. Tremors shook the trees from their roots. What had once been a land of life was now falling into silence. And above it all the volcano loomed, its smoke now stretching across the entire horizon. The journey had begun with the goal of escape. Now it was a search for higher land, for safety for others. Each step was harder, each day darker. But Cedosaurus no longer walked alone, and in that there was strength. Shall we move to the climax, the turning point where the greatest test awaits? Climax! The sky had turned black, not with night, but with ash. The sun was only a pale memory behind thick clouds of smoke and dust. The air stung every breath, and the ground beneath Cedosaurus's feet no longer felt like earth. It shook, constantly cracking open in places, releasing bursts of steam that hissed through the forest like angry spirits. Ahead the ridge rose steep, and jagged, a final barrier between them, and the lands rumored to be safe, green, untouched high ground above the ash zone. But the slope was dangerous, carved by earthquakes and erosion. It was narrow, barely wide enough for one to pass at a time. The group paused. The Dryosaurus was weak, barely able to walk. The Stegosaurus stood silent beside it, swaying slightly from exhaustion. Even the sky riders above had grown quiet, circling slower now, as if watching from a distance, waiting to see what would happen. Cedosaurus looked up at the ridge, then back at the forest below. The trees had caught fire behind them, orange light flickering against the smoke. They could not go back. This was the only way forward. With a deep breath, he stepped onto the path. The climb began slowly. Rocks slipped under his massive feet. The wind howled around the cliffside, threatening to push him off balance. His body trembled with each step, not from fear, but from exhaustion and strain. Below, the others waited, watching every movement. Halfway up the ridge, a thunderclap cracked through the mountain. A tremor stronger than any before tore through the ridge. The ground split, and part of the path collapsed. Boulders crashed into the forest below, and a cry echoed from the trees. The Dryosaurus had fallen behind, tripped, and stuck between two rocks. It cried out, but the fire was closing in. Cedosaurus froze. He looked back at the Stegosaurus. The spiked giant had turned to protect the young one, backing into flames, swinging its tail to keep the heat and danger away. But it would not last. The smoke was too thick and the heat too intense. With a roar louder than he had ever made, Cedosaurus turned back. He descended quickly, his legs straining, his heart pounding. He reached the bottom and pushed through the fire, swinging his tail to knock burning branches aside. The young Dryosaurus trembled, unable to move. The Stegosaurus had collapsed beside it, breathing shallowly, scorched and tired. Ceteosaurus stepped over them both. He used his body as a shield, lowering his head and pushing the Dryosaurus forward with his snout. He nudged it onto a patch of cool earth and then turned to the Stegosaurus. It tried to rise, but its legs shook too much. Smoke burned his eyes, but Ceteosaurus leaned down and braced his body against the other giant slowly, helping it to its feet. Together they moved. The flames chased them, but they did not stop. Up the slope again through the broken path, one step at a time. The wind tore at their faces, but they pushed forward. Behind them, the fire swallowed the forest. In front of them, the ridge waited. Finally, they reached the top. The air was clearer here, the sky still dark, but the wind stronger, blowing the ash to the west. Ahead lay rolling hills covered in green, untouched by fire. Streams ran clean and cold. Birds flew freely across the open air. It was a new land. The Dryosaurus collapsed in the grass, too tired to stand but alive. The Stegosaurus lay beside it, watching the sky. And Ceteosaurus stood tall at the ridge's edge, his great body covered in ash and burns, but his eyes clear. He had crossed the fire. He had faced the end of the world, and walked through it not alone, but as part of something greater. Not a conqueror, not a survivor, a guardian. Would you like me to continue with the following action, where the consequences unfold and the story begins to resolve? Ask ChatGPT. He land beyond the ridge felt like another world. The sky, though still clouded, held patches of blue now. The ash fell less with each passing hour, and the ground was firm again under Ceteosaurus's feet. The wind brought the scent of clean water and distant trees, not the bitter smoke of burning forests. For the first time in many days, the earth was quiet. Ceteosaurus stood watch as the others rested. The Dryosaurus had regained its footing, though its steps were uneven. It now followed close to the Stegosaurus, who, despite its wounds, moved steadily through grasslands. Their bond had formed through survival, not by words, but through trust built in silence and shared danger. They had come through fire and hunger, through collapse and fear. They had left behind the only world they had ever known, a place now covered in smoke and memory. But in doing so, they had discovered something deeper than instinct, the power of unity. Ceteosaurus had always walked alone. In his old world, that had been enough. Solitude had meant safety. Routine had meant peace. But the eruption had stripped the land of its order, and in that chaos, he had found others, not just companions, but connections. Lives that had leaned on his strength and given him purpose beyond mere survival. They moved now through rolling fields that stretched far in every direction. Small streams crossed their path, and herds of unfamiliar herbivores grazed in the distance. The land was untouched by the fires below. Here, life had held its ground. New trees rose from the soil, shorter than the towering ferns of the old forest, but strong and green. The air carried sounds of calm. Insects humming, birds calling, the wind rustling leaves. At a wide riverbank, they stopped. The Dryosaurus waded into the shallow edge, drinking eagerly. The Stegosaurus lowered itself beside the water, closing its eyes under the soft light. Ceteosaurus remained standing for a moment, watching the current. It was slow but constant, like time, like healing. There was no celebration. Dinosaurs did not sing or dance. But in the way the group rested, in the way the wind moved around them, there was peace. He turned his long neck toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills, others might still roam. More of his kind, more survivors. Or perhaps not. Perhaps they were the last to have crossed the fire. But it did not matter now. They had found a place to begin again. In this new land, they would not be ruled by fear. They had learned to walk through destruction without turning into it. They had faced the edge of extinction, not by domination, but by endurance and togetherness. Ceteosaurus stepped into the river, the cool water flowing around his legs. He lowered his head and drank deeply. The taste was clean and full of life. Around him, the world breathed again, and for the first time in a long while, he let himself rest. Time passed slowly in the new land. The scars left by fire and ash faded with the rains. The grass grew thicker. Trees took root where the wind carried seeds. The rivers widened, and the silence of survival gave way to the quiet rhythm of life again. Cedosaurus remained near the valley. He no longer wandered as far as before. He had found what he had not known he was seeking, not just safety, but stillness, a place where steps no longer carried the weight of fear, where each breath was no longer a question of survival, but a return to something older, something deeper. The Dryosaurus had grown stronger. It chased insects through the grass and swam in the shallow streams. The Stegosaurus, though still bearing the marks of its journey, moved with strength again, often grazing beside Cedosaurus without needing words. The air between them was full of quiet understanding. They were no longer just survivors. They were a herd. One morning, as mist rolled across the valley, a sound echoed in the distance, a deep, low call. Familiar, faint but real. Cedosaurus raised his head slowly and listened. It came again, this time closer. A long-necked shadow appeared on the distant ridge, followed by another, then two more. Sauropods, his kind. He watched them for a long time as they moved slowly down toward the valley. He did not move to meet them, not right away. He felt no urgency, no fear. There would be time. This place was not the world he had known, but it would be home. Not because it was safe, but because he had helped make it safe. Not because it was free of danger, but because he had chosen to walk through danger for others. Peace, he had learned, was not given. It was made. As the sun rose behind the new trees and the valley filled with soft light, Cedosaurus stepped forward. The earth welcomed his weight. The sky above was wide and quiet. And in that moment, the story of a solitary giant became the beginning of something greater. Not the end of an age, but the first page of a new one.